I'm ready.
Going to get us back over to Zoom. And we are now live on Facebook. This is excellent. Welcome, everybody. Jivamaya Yoga Wisdom Talks. My goodness, it's October already. Can you believe it? This is amazing. We've made it. I know, right? I, for one, in Las Vegas, am very happy. The three-digit figures have disappeared, so I'm delighted. And I'm equally delighted to welcome today Felicia Tomasko, a dear friend from many, many years, and just this amazing soul, registered nurse, Ayurvedic practitioner, all of this is certified, of course, yoga therapist, lifelong commitment to the power of practice of the integrative yoga. She's been practicing, or she believes in practicing, with the body that you have right now, meeting yourself with compassion and honesty. Felicia is also the editor-in-chief of LA Yoga Magazine, a very long time and rather awesome teacher. You can catch her on Glow, G-L-O. It's a wonderful site for online yoga classes. And without further ado, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. This is awesome. I so appreciate it. So this month we're talking about the three big emotions of fear, anger, and grief. And Felicia has very kindly offered to address the subject of fear. Before we move into that, though, let's find out a little bit about Felicia. How did you begin your journey? How did this all come about?
Well, it's so interesting because in many ways it might be fear that began my journey. Um, and sort of the irony of life. I am, I'm one of those people that, for whom I think a lot of us can relate to that. My whole life I've had a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear and a lot of these kinds of things that I think are in some ways part and parcel of what it is to live in a human body. And when I was a kid, I mean, I still have kind of a lot of fears, like actual, like real phobia fears. But when I was a kid, I had such a bad fear of heights that to be in an open elevator, to go up a flight, certain kinds of flights of stairs where you could see down, to have to go fast down a hill, like riding a bike fast down a hill. I will, to this day, I will come off of my bike and walk it down a hill. I had fears of going over bridges, like, not just normal person fear of heights, but pretty extreme, pretty far and extreme fear of heights, to the point where I'm sure I drove my parents nuts because we would have to do like I wouldn't be able to get in certain kinds of elevators or certain kinds of stairs or escalators or anything open or anything else. I mean, I still can't really, there's a lot, I still can't really drive over bridges. Um, there's a couple things that I've done once and swore I would never in my life do again because it was so difficult. So that really deep fear, now I do whatever I can to avoid certain situations. Um, but that level of fear, and I think that level of embedded fear that had no real cause, it's not like I was dropped from a flight of stairs, it's not like I had an elevator trauma, it's not like I was in a car accident. So in some ways, that how deeply this was embedded for me, I have a feeling is, in to some extent, probably why I sought out, in terms of that, like, teenager with the existential crisis, um, sought out philosophy and yoga practices and meditation and what are the answers to different aspects of a world that doesn't always make sense, to a world that doesn't always make sense. So I did start practicing yoga and meditation in high school, when I was also, doing all the things, like even I remember my mother took me to somebody who did hypnotherapy. Like I had tried everything, almost any kind of therapy or whatever it is for those kinds of things. Um, and I have had a pretty steady meditation and yoga practice since then. Well, not just pretty steady, steady, like daily steady. Like it's the thing, it's the anchor in my life. It's the thing that makes the world that doesn't make sense. So for me, I think it was the this sort of unexplicable, gripping fear, panic attack level fear, anxiety level fear, everything else that actually led me in many ways to these teachings. And it was first meditation and then yoga asana and then Ayurveda. And all of those things kind of wrapped up to the point where it's so much a part of me, all of these, that I can't imagine my life without any of them.
Right.
But I also can't imagine my life without like this gripping fear. Like I don't, it's puzzling to me that people can just drive over bridges.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Like to this day, there are certain things like, I have to get people to drive me places sometimes.
It's good you don't live in San Francisco.
Oh yeah, I myself drove myself once over the Golden Gate Bridge once, and never again. Never again will I be able to do it. Like that was horrible. And other people, I seriously, every time I'm there, somebody else has to drive me. I can't do it.
So when we work with the idea of fear and the emotion of fear, where does that originate from? How can we find where it begins?
Well,
And is it necessary to?
is it necessary to? And we use the word fear as if it were one thing.
Mhm.
Right? We talk about fear as if all fear were the same, as if it only means one thing. But really, I think it's on a continuum. There's a gradation of everything that we feel. And if you go to the texts, the yogic tradition, one of the five kleshas, one of the obstacles to our clarity of mind is abhinivesha. And abhinivesha literally translates to mean the fear of death. And it is said that that's the ultimate fear from which all fear arises, right? The ultimate fear from which all fear arises. That fear of annihilation, that fear of death, that fear of pain, that fear of suffering, that fear, that constriction. And fear has a constricting kind of effect on the body. And it's something that, if we think about the fact that it's identified as one of the kleshas, that it's actually part of our lived experience as a human, then there's an aspect of, well, where does it come from? Well, it just is. It's embedded in what it is to be born and live this life. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we all experience it in the same way or for the same reasons or in the same circumstances, or that it's necessarily a weakness.
Right.
Right, there's some when we think about discernment, there can be some healthy fear like a burning building or anything else. There's those kinds of moments, but there's also the way in which, and I think this is why fear is one of the kleshas, one of the obstacles. There's the way in which we can be gripped by fear, in which anxiety or the fear we project into the future, the way we can act from a place of fear, the way fear clouds our minds, the way I think collectively in the world right now, we're dealing with the fact that our baseline fear has been dialed up a few notches. And when we think about the Ayurvedic energetics of fear of this emotional state, it's this disruption or disturbance or vitiation of what we identify as the Vata dosha. So we have this nervous system dysregulation that manifests as our inability to hold that intensity of energy. because I think there's a great benefit to being able to relax around fear. So that was maybe a longer answer to your question than you expected,
No,
but
no, and you brought up the interesting question about energy because every emotion does have its own energy. So, and is that energy different for each person, or depending on what type of fear they're experiencing at the same time at the time, or is it really quite across the board in a sense the energy of fear?
I think there's also a sense of, so many different emotional states. And we can also think about how attraction and aversion are both considered kleshas, right? Or how both pleasure and pain roll off of the same neural pathways, or how excitement and that, like a roller coaster, right? Which is both exciting and activating and can
Yeah.
initiate fear. So it's that energy. So a lot of what I think we speak about in terms of these feeling states, emotional states, processes, or anything else is that they are processes of energy, and they're processes of energy. And one, I think, in my opinion, one of the things that the practices of yoga and ayurveda and all of these teachings can offer us is a way to strengthen our personal capacity in human bodies for holding energy, or not even necessarily holding energy, because that's a little bit of a misnomer, but allowing energy to move through us, or allowing ourselves to be vessels of energy, or allowing ourselves to be able to process, contain whatever verb seems to make sense, but any of them are not necessarily adequate to describe what it really is.
So, in a sense, we're also really talking about the three gunas moving from that sort of tamasic state where you're just totally paralyzed with whatever it might be, and really using that rajasic state, which is that action, in order to be able to arrive at some sort of sense of clarity, what you were just talking about, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think if we think about the gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, sometimes we think that sattva is untouched by anything,
Yeah.
or that it's completely pure, or that it's this state of perfection, where I would dare us to consider that sattva is the spaciousness where we can allow ourselves to be human and face that humanity with pure compassionate honesty, and ride things through us. Because there can be, just as somebody can be paralyzed by fear, they can be somebody who is completely, say, unafraid in situations where fear might be appropriate.
Right.
Either way it can be destructive. So I believe the answer isn't necessarily, or the answer isn't found in removing fear. It's how are we not succumbing to the experience in any direction? How are we able to anchor ourselves amidst whatever is arising?
Right. Right.
And I'm not necessarily saying that, my tactic of, never again being the driver over the Golden Gate Bridge is the answer either. I'm aware that, each one of us, there's aspects of how we feel about things from all kinds of different levels, and the ways in which our nervous system might be wired or hypervigilant or need extra support, or anything else. There isn't one answer, I think, for any of it. There are many answers.
And the fear right now for many is very real. It's very, very real. They have families to feed, and there's no job, and there's no employment, and it's a very strong emotion at that time. The
Yeah, and
opposite,
it's not necessarily realistic to just be like, don't be afraid,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Just let's fill it all with rainbows, right? And that's where there is sometimes, even though in the text it's talked about fear being a klesha, it doesn't mean that there are times when it arises for in response to or for appropriate reasons. And then it's also, how are we not gripped by it so that we are blocked from seeing the solutions or being able to be constructive and not destructive.
right, right,
Because collectively, we are going through something that is fear is not surprising.
right.
Fear is something we might wake up with at 3 in the morning. Fear is something that we might feel when we turn on the news.
And so when that emotion of fear appears, what are the tools that yoga and Ayurveda can give us that, or what what are the tools that they do give us? Can give us, um, that would really assist us in what you were talking about, being able to really, in a sense, contain that energy and be able to use it in a positive manner, to become creative, to think out of the box, to mm, not go into denial, but to also have tremendous faith that, okay, I can do this. This is a bump in the road, and how do we get past that bump in the road sometimes without freaking out?
Right. Well, and I think there's many, many teachings around this. And I also believe that it is the core of all the teachings. It is the core of all the teachings, which is that sense of increasing our capacity in order to show up, strengthening our nervous system so that we can run energy through the wiring of our own physiology. It's everything from Krishna's teachings to Arjun in the Bhagavad Gita about doing your work in the world, even in the face of impossibility, even in the face of, the archetypal enemy, even in the face of the situation that you absolutely do not want to be in, even in the face of why why can't I just like hang in the couch and eat ice cream, right? That symbolic archetypal thing of this is the practice, this is the practice, this is the strength. And I think it's also doing everything that is available to us. And I also think if we consider the time in which we live and we consider, say, that Ayurveda puts a great value on our dinacharya, our daily practices, that all of the aspects of yoga put an emphasis on everything from our ability to connect to our breath and our ability to move with freedom in our body, that whatever we were doing in January of 2020 may not be enough to strengthen us in October or whatever we are in right now. So we need to look at, okay, well, what is my bare minimum that keeps me breathing and on the planet? And then what above and beyond that and will allow me to continue to show up in the impossible situation that is this human life. It really, I mean, we're sort of in this, it's sort of this like cosmic joke. We're in this impossible situation where resolution will not come in the forms that we seek. And the challenges are many, and we may or may not have the satisfaction of the results that we want. So, but that's not important. That it's to do it anyway. It is to take care of ourselves. It is to take care of our family. It is to show up and take care of the people around us to the best of our dharmic ability. So it's doing all of it. And this is why in the teachings, there isn't just one practice. Okay, I'm going to give you the magic practice. I'm going to give you the magic practice that will release all fear. And that doesn't exist. If it existed, I would have found it a long time ago because I've been looking. So, maybe somebody else wouldn't. I'm not saying that I'm like superpower here, but there is this sense of all of it matters, and all of it matters every day. And the thing I would say too about your question related to, well, what are the practices? It's what are the practices that you're doing today? And to remember that whatever I did yesterday, that was all well and good, but I need to do things again to move me through with strength, to strengthen my capacity to handle today. And tomorrow I'm going to have to get up. If, I do have the opportunity to get up, I will have to get up and I will have to practice again, whatever that is, whether that is eating plant-based foods that are rich in antioxidants, eating things that help calm vata, having healthy carbs or healthy fats, having anything that's green, whether it is actually moving in such a way that I'm not, making my back unhappy, or that I'm helping to create more freedom in my shoulders, and returning the phone calls that I have to return. And even if I am afraid to do so, right? Even if it's the bank calling, and to breathe and create more spaciousness for all of it. And I think there's an aspect of that, using practice on a daily basis for the intentionality of the strength of the work that we must do in the world. And this is really the core, I think, of the teachings in our present day experience. In our present day experience, the teachings are not about how do we leave this world and how do we check out, but how do we live in this world? How do we live in this world? And how do we use whatever practice, whether it is paying attention to our breath, whether it is eating food that actually nourishes us and doesn't just kind of blow out our adrenals, whether it is stepping with our bare feet on the earth, whether it is sleeping in the dark. And when we think about those practices, it's sleep whether it's like we turn off the screen to sleep in the dark. That is a profound Ayurvedic practice. To put our bare feet on the floor, on the earth, on the grass, on the soil is a profound yogic practice. To pay attention to our breath and to do those things every day. And I keep thinking too about the mantra that talks about leading us from the unreal to the real. And in some ways, there are aspects, not that I'm saying it's not real, because it is, but to remind ourselves, and I do this every day, to remind myself to look at the sky and to look at the trees and to remember that there is an aspect of the world that is real. And to show up and to do even the things that maybe I do not want to do, and to not expect that the fear will go away, but what is my way to work with those strengths? And sometimes it is okay to ask somebody to drive the car for you.
What's interesting is I'm finding, and I don't know if you're finding this, but I have a dear friend who, quite well known in the yoga world, been teaching for many, many years, has not done any yoga really to speak of. When I say yoga, I mean the asana practice and really sitting down and doing a real, this is going to be my hour to do my yoga practice on the mat. She's not really done anything for like the last maybe 6-7 months, but what she is doing is gardening, and has kind of developed this whole new world for herself, this whole new life for herself, bringing her yoga practice, but into her communication with plants. And it's really like, it's almost as if this has led her to another extension of a dharma for her. You know what I'm saying? So it's, and I'm finding this with people that they've lost their jobs. They have to think out of the box. They need to find something, and they're strong enough, as you were saying, that they can just kind of sit down and take a breath and listen, which is always so hard, especially when you're a little freaked out. Listen and try to find what it is that that can be presented to them, or that's trying to be presented to them, that they can move forward with. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think it's even simplistic to say yoga on the mat, yoga off the mat, right? Yoga and our practice is really about how we move with and through our bodies, through all of our activities in the day. That if we are to translate the word asana to mean seat or posture, and if we are to look at what even is inferred in the teachings, an asana is not warrior one or warrior two. And our yoga practice is not just a sun salutation or a shavasana, that it really is what is our relationship with the ways in which we move our bodies, and what is the relationship between the ecosystem within us and the ecosystem around us. And especially, I think, in this particular time in the history of people's relationship with yogic teachings, is that, at this point in time, who are the people practicing yoga predominantly? People who we would at one point in time call householders, right? Not the renunciates, not the ascetics, not the people who have checked out from the world, but the people who do have to, on the first of the month, make sure the bills are paid and make sure there is stuff in the fridge for the other people in the house, and people who have to protect little beings and people who have to walk the dog and people who have to get the oil changed. So these are the practices of yoga. So these are the practices of yoga in the world today. So what is it? How is it that we're practicing? And how is it that we're using our yoga practice in the way that we sit at our desk, drive the car, doing homeschooling with the kids, and showing up on Zoom?
So you're talking about awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even with fear, right? Fear, which we can describe as an obstacle, how do we turn our awareness to fear? And I think the sense of the even fear as an obstacle, it's because we want to apply attraction or aversion to it. We want to avert ourselves from it, or we want to think that to be strong means to not be afraid or to be brave or anything else. But it's to look at, how do we turn our attention to it? How are we aware of its existence? How do we even admit it to ourselves when at 4 in the morning we wake up and how am I going to do this today? And to recognize, and I think that's part of the compassionate honesty that we can look to in ourselves in that process. Like, oh, I feel this. Well, it doesn't mean that feeling fear makes us a failure as a human being. It is embedded in the very code of what it is to be human.
So in our last minute together, what words of wisdom pop into your head about fear, to help anyone that might be listening to this to just, I can do this.
I think it's seeing it for not as a weakness or not as something to push aside, but seeing it as part of the reality with which we have to face the world, and to not necessarily expect that it's going to go away. Like, I will do this when I no longer feel afraid. And to maybe just take, just to find a seat, to take a breath, to recognize it as part of the experience, and to almost breathe almost breathe space around it, even though that sounds very subtle or anything else, to breathe space around it. So your breath becomes larger than the fear, and that your body is larger than the fear, and your energy is larger than the fear, so that you can still exist and act and do your work and be in your body, and you are bigger than the fear.
People present. Wow, thank you. That's amazing. So we all can now Move forward.
And you
Embrace.
are bigger than the fear.
We are bigger than the fear. I
Bigger
love
than
it.
the fear.
I love it. I love it.
Mhm,
Alicia, thank you so much. This is
mhm.
really tremendous. I so appreciate you. Is Lulu around?
She is, but she's completely uninterested
Yeah.
in Zoom.
All right.
So,
This little
mhm.
Lulu, her face is, she's got one of the cutest little faces
Do you
ever.
need me to go get her?
Lulu is a dog. Why don't you go get her
All
quickly?
right. I'll be right back.
Okay. And so the rest of the month, we will continue with these three emotions. The next two are grief and anger. I am not going to be recording next week. Next week, I'm going to take the week off. I've got somewhere to go. And there's Lulu. Hi, Lulu. Oh, she is way too cute.
She is too cute.
Hi there. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I needed that. So cute.
And she has an to remind herself that she is larger than the fear.
I love it. I love it. She's awesome.
Mhm.
Thank you, Lulu. I hope we didn't wake you up.
Well, we did, but that's all right. She can handle it,
She'll
right?
handle
Right? What do you think? What do you think?
it. Aw, so cute. So next week we're going to take a break week. We're not going to do a Jivamaya Yoga talk next week, but we resume on the 21st of October with Ann Pittman. And I'll be writing to you all about Ann. She is amazing. She's lives up in Ottawa. She's going to be addressing the emotion of grief. She has worked with cancer patients and their families for many, many, many years, and has such a beautiful take, if I can say it that way, such a beautiful understanding of this word grief, which I think all of us are experiencing at this time. And then at the end of the month, Adrian Deva, my dear friend, who will be talking about anger, which I think we also are experiencing, and he'll wrap that up with emotional intelligence. So we have quite a week, and it's been launched by Felicia, and we can't thank you enough. So awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you all again on the 21st. Yay.